I'm Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library. Although, as we have been in the last few readings, I'm not at the La Jolla Library, but I'm recouping from this after a bit of a surprise. But we're still continuing our reading, and we're almost done. We're not quite at the end yet, but we are getting nearer to the end of our selection of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. So we will be reading another three chapters today, chapters 30, 31, and 32. Just to give you a brief recap on where we've gotten to up to this point, um, our main character, Jim Hawkins, young Jim, uh, who has put in with his friends Dr. Livesey and Squire Trelawney and Captain Smollett and a few of the men that they had hired, um, have gone in search of this treasure. The rest of the ship was populated by mutineers, and so the other sailors on board turned out to be, most of which turned out to be part of old pirate Captain Flint's crew, looking for his buried treasure here on this island. And so they've pretended to be regular sailors. They have uh, acted as more or less as normal sailors up until the time that they've reached Treasure Island, at which point they decided to mutiny and were fully willing to murder everyone who was not part of their group. Um, Jim Hawkins gets off the boat. He makes his way on a one of the rowboats to the island before everyone else. He meets another old pirate by the name of Ben Gunn, um, who seems to be a friendly sort and seems to be a kind of fellow who is maybe a little off his beam a little bit. He's not quite 100% there, but he's certainly glad to see another human being, and he's certainly looking for food that is not goat. And so um, we see that Jim Hawkins has uh, spent some time with Ben Gunn, Dr. Livesey, Squire Trelawney, Captain Smollett, and their men have also made it to the island, and they have found a stockade which has been built by the pirates previously years ago, and they've used it as their fortification to save themselves. Of course, Long John Silver's mutineers have attacked the stockade on several occasions, and they've defended themselves. And while a couple of the Squire Trelawney's men and Captain Smollett's men, the honest ones, um, have perished in the battle, Captain Silver's men have come out worse for the wear. Now, in our last couple of chapters, Jim Hawkins steals aboard. Ben Gunn tells him about a small, flat, not very seaworthy uh, boat hewn out of the tree trunks, and um, tells him where it is in case he needs to get off the island somehow. And Jim decides he's going to go over to the Hispaniola, the ship that they brought over here, and he is going to cut the anchor loose. So the anchor is attached by this giant woven rope, just very thick, huge rope, and he takes him some time, and of course it takes him even more time to get over there because the boat is so iffy, not very seaworthy. But he makes his way over there, and he eventually cuts the rope, and the Hispaniola is set adrift. Now, several very interesting things happen at this point. One is that Jim is able to jump from the boat into onto the Hispaniola, climb up onto the Hispaniola, and basically declares himself captain, which is kind of a great scene, where he says, "Well, I guess I'm the captain now because I'm the one in charge." He meets who a man who is one of the mutineers, Israel Hands, who is basically Long John Silver's second in command. Not a very nice fellow, and they decide they're going to gently beach the Hispaniola on one of the shores, not too far. So, but do it in a way that they can take it back again. When the tide rises, they can get off the beach and they can continue to sail. But uh, you know, Israel Hands is very drunk and he's basically hungover and he hasn't had much to eat and he's still not quite with it, but he knows that this young man has him dead to rights, and so he's willing to kind of pretend to help. And so they do that. They sail the ship around the side of the island to a beach where they can basically they put it up on shore. The Hispaniola tips over onto its side, and that's when Jim realizes that Israel Hands has a knife, a dirk in his hands, and he's going to kill him. So you know, really adventurous stuff going on here. Jim Hawkins has a couple of guns, which he had gotten from, I believe he'd gotten them from Ben Gunn, and he fires both guns at Israel Hands, but of course they had gotten wet with seawater, and so the guns didn't work. Neither one of them worked. So Jim Hawkins climbs into the rigging, and Israel Hands makes to follow him, but he can only follow him slowly because um, Israel Hands has himself gotten into a fight before all this happened, while the mutineers were all drunk on board the Hispaniola, and he has a knife wound in his thigh. The other man, a man named O'Brien, got the worst part of it. He was killed. But with this knife wound in his thigh, uh, Israel Hands places the knife in his mouth, like you always see in those pirate movies. He places the knife in his mouth, he climbs up the rigging, and this gives Jim enough time to put in fresh powder and shot in the pistols, and but he still can't really. He doesn't want to kill the man, but that's when Israel Hands pulls the knife out of his mouth, throws it at Jim, sticks him in the shoulder. His hands clench up, and he fires both barrels, and Israel Hands is dead. So, having done this, Jim makes his way back to the stockade where he left Dr. Livesey and Squire Trelawney and Captain Smollett. And when he gets in there, it's late at night and he can't really see who's in there. But when he goes in, he realizes the stockade isn't filled with his friends anymore. The stockade is filled with the mutineers. Long John Silver is there, and several of his pirate buddies are there as well. And then they basically have a discussion, if you will, saying, hey, what are you doing here? Oh, I see. They assume that Jim, has decided to throw his lot in with the pirates because, of course, that's what they would do, and that just makes him a smart fellow. And Jim plays it cagey, right? He doesn't want to necessarily tell them all the stuff that's been going on, and he doesn't really know what the situation is, so he's kind of trying to feel out what the current situation is and what's happened while he's been gone. And he tells them basically that while I've been away, I've taken the Hispaniola, I've beached it, so you can't get anywhere with her, and it's going to take a bunch of men to get her off that beach, and I've killed Israel Hands. And the funny thing here is that you see Long John Silver gain an actual and legitimate admiration and respect for Jim Hawkins. And it's funny how that changes because, and they discuss this later on in that chapter, where he's telling him all this stuff that he's done, and Long John is like, has often said throughout the story that Jim Hawkins reminds him of himself when he was younger, and to know that this young man has bravely taken it upon himself, fighting these evil pirates, and has taken the ship away from all of the other mutineers, and done it all on his own, is an astounding thing for him, for a boy who's 15 years old, basically. And And so, as they're all talking, the other pirates want to kill Jim Hawkins because he was part of the group that was not one of the mutineers originally. And um, Long John Silver basically says, "No, I'm not going to kill. He's got more guts than any of you. I want to keep him here. I want to keep him with me because he deserves to live after all that." Well, this sparks yet another round of sort of complaining and mutinous behavior from Long John Silver's men. And like we had seen in the early chapters, they all the other men except for Long John Silver and Jim Hawkins go outside of the stockade and they all have this big discussion and they all talk for a great long time. And finally, when they come back in, you can see that they're afraid of Long John Silver. They have one of the sailors has something in his hand and he wants to give it to Long John, but he creeps up very slowly and very cautiously, like he's going to bite him or something. But eventually, he drops it, and he hands it over, and he runs back really fast to be with the other pirates. And it's a page out of a book, and on it is written the Black Spot, which, as we saw previously from um, that Black Dog had given Billy Bones back in the Admiral Benbow Inn at the very beginning of our story. So here we are coming around again, now that the crew is basically saying, "I don't agree with you, Long John Silver. We're going to draw lots and we're going to choose a new captain." So here you see some of the genius in Robert Louis Stevenson's writing, because he writes Long John Silver to in a way that he plays upon the fears of the mutineers. The first thing he does is he says, "Where did you get this piece of paper? It's from a Bible. How dare you? What fool would tear a page out of a Bible?" And then you start hearing the other pirates go, "Oh, yeah, I didn't want to do that. I thought that was a bad idea from the very beginning. And oh, I can't believe we're cursed. Now we have a bad luck on us because of that." And it's like, you can see, all these reasons. The pirates give their reasons for why they don't want Long John Silver to be captain, and part of it is because of, they don't want his favoritism towards Jim Hawkins, and it's, all this other stuff, and then it's because he let Dr. Livesey and Squire Trelawney and Captain Smollett live rather than just killing them when they had the chance, and it's things like this, and then um, Long John Silver basically just throws the paper away and says, "You want to know why he did all that stuff?" And he gives them all these reasons why. Well, I have Jim Hawkins here because we need a hostage. We can't bargain if we don't have a hostage. And I let Squire Trelawney live because of this reason. And he's rattling as cool as a cucumber the entire time. And by the time he's done speaking, he says, "Now let's have that vote and see who you want to be your captain." And they all vote for Long John Silver again as captain, and it's hilarious. I mean, it's just the fact that he manipulates them in such a way is such a wonderful kind of a bit of characterization for Long John Silver, and it really kind of tells you who he is as a character. And that's where we left it in our last chapter. It was nighttime, and all the pirates were going to go to sleep in the stockade, and that is where we ended chapter 29. And if you are ready, because I know I am, we will go to chapter 30, which is entitled "On Parole." I was awakened. Indeed, we were all awakened, for I could see even the sentinel shake himself together from where he had fallen against the doorpost, by a clear, hearty voice hailing us from the margin of the wood. "Blockhouse, ahoy!" it cried. "Here's the doctor." And the doctor it was. Although I was glad to hear the sound, yet my gladness was not without admixture. I remembered with confusion my insubordinate and stealthy conduct, and when I saw where it had brought me, among what companions and surrounded by what dangers, I felt ashamed to look him in the face. He must have risen in the dark, For the day had hardly come, and when I ran to a loophole and looked out, I saw him standing, like silver once before, up to the mid-leg in creeping vapor. "Yo, doctor! Top of the morning to you, sir!" cried Silver, broad awake and beaming with good nature in a moment. "Bright and early to be sure, and it's the early bird, as the saying goes, that gets the rations. George, shake up your timbers, son. Help Dr. Livesey over the ship's side. All a-doing well, your patience was, all well and merry." So he pattered on, standing on the hilltop with his crutch under his elbow and one hand upon the side of the log house, quite the old John in voice, manner, and expression. "We've quite a surprise for you, too, sir," he continued. "We've a little stranger here. Hee hee! A new boarder and lodger, sir, and looking fit and taut as a fiddle. Slept like supercargo, he did, right alongside of John. Stem to stem he was all night." Dr. Livesey was by this time across the stockade and pretty near the cook, and I could hear the alteration in his voice as he said, "Not Jim?" "The very same Jim as ever was," said Silver. The doctor stopped outright, although he did not speak, and it was some seconds before he seemed able to move on. "Well, well," he said at last. Duty first, and pleasure afterwards. As you might have said yourself, Silver, let us overhaul these patients of yours." A moment afterwards he had entered the block house, and with one grim nod to me proceeded with his work among the sick. He seemed under no apprehension, though he must have known that his life among these treacherous demons depended on a hair, and he rattled on to his patients as if he were paying an ordinary professional visit in a quiet English family. His manner, I suppose, reacted on the men, for they behaved to him as if nothing had occurred, as if he were still the ship's doctor and they still faithful hands before the mast. "You're doing well, my friend," he said to the fellow with the bandaged head. "And if ever a person had a close shave, it was you. Your head must be as hard as iron. Well, George, how goes it? You're a pretty color, certainly. Why, your liver, man, is upside down. Did you take that medicine? Did he take that medicine, men?" "Aye, aye, sir, he took it sure enough," returned Morgan. "Because, you see, since I'm a mutineer's doctor, or prison doctor, as I prefer to call it," says Dr. Livesey in his pleasantest way, "I make it a point to honor, make it a point of honor not to lose a man for King George, God bless him, and the gallows." The rogues looked at each other, but swallowed the home thrust in silence. "Dick don't feel well, sir," said one. "Don't he?" replied the doctor. "Well, step up here, Dick, and let me see your tongue." "No, I should be surprised if he did. The man's tongue is fit to frighten the French. Another fever." "Ah, there," said Morgan. "That comed of spilling Bibles." "That comes, as you call it, of being errant asses," retorted the doctor, "and not having sense enough to know honest air from poison and the dry land from a vile, pestiferous slough. I think it most probable, though of course it's only an opinion, that you'll all have the deuce to pay before you get that malaria out of your systems. Camp in a bog, would you, Silver? I'm surprised at you. You're less of a fool than many, take you all around, but you don't appear to me to have the rudiments of a notion of the rules of health. Well," he added, after he had dosed them round and had taken his prescriptions with a really laughable humility, more like charity school children than blood-guilty mutineers and pirates, "well, that's done for today. And now I should wish to have a talk with that boy, please." And he nodded his head in my direction carelessly. George Mary was at the door, spitting and sputtering over some bad-tasted medicine, but at the first word of the doctor's proposal, he swung round with a deep flush and cried, "No!" and swore. Silver struck the barrel with his open hand. "Silence!" he roared, and looked at him positively like a lion. "Doctor," he went on in his usual tones, I was thinking of that. No one as how you had a fancy for the boy. We're all humbly grateful for your kindness, and, as you see, puts faith in you and takes the drugs down like that much grog. And I take it I've found a way as'll suit all. Hawkins, will you give me your word of honor as a young gentleman, for a young gentleman you are, although poor born, your word of honor not to slip your cable?" I readily gave the pledge required. "Then, doctor," said Silver, "you just step outside of that stockade, and once you're there, I'll bring the boy down on the inside, and I reckon you can yarn through the spars. Good day to you, sir, and all our duties to the squire and Captain Smollett." The explosion of disapproval, which nothing but Silver's black looks had restrained, broke out immediately. Immediately the doctor had left the house. Silver was roundly accused of playing double, of trying to make a separate peace for himself, of sacrificing the interests of his accomplices and victims, and, in one word, of the identical, exact thing that he was doing. It seemed to me so obvious in this case that I could not imagine how he was to turn their anger. But he was twice the man the rest were, and his last night's victory had given him a huge preponderance on their minds. He called them all fools and dolts, you can imagine, said it was necessary I should talk to the doctor, fluttered the chart in their faces, asked them if they could afford to break the treaty the very day they were bound a treasure hunting. "No, by thunder," he cried. "It's us must break the treaty when the time comes. Until then, I'll gammon on the doctor. I'll gammon that doctor if I have to I'll gammon that doctor if I have to ile his boots with brandy." And then he bade them get the fire lit, and stalked out upon his crutch, and with his hand on my shoulder, leaving them in a disarray and silenced by his volubility rather than convinced. "Slow, lad, slow," he said. "They might round upon us in a twinkle of an eye if we was seen to hurry." Very deliberately, then, did we advance across the sand to where the doctor awaited us on the other side of the stockade, and as soon as we were within easy speaking distance, Silver stopped. "You'll make a note of this here also, doctor," says he, "and the boy'll tell you how I saved his life. We were deposed for it, too, and you may lay to that, doctor. When a man's steering as near the wind as me, playing chuck farthing with the last breath in his body like, you wouldn't think it too much, mayhap, to give him one good word. You'll please bear it in mind. It's not my life only now. It's that boy's into the bargain, and you'll speak for me fair, doctor, and give me a bit of hope to go on for the sake of mercy." Silver was a changed man once he got out there and had his back to his friends and the blockhouse. His cheeks seemed to have fallen in. His voice trembled. Never was a soul more dead in earnest. "Why, John, you're not afraid?" asked Dr. Livesey. "Doctor, I'm no coward. No, not I. Not so much." And he snapped his fingers. "If I was, I wouldn't say it. But I'll own up fairly. I've the shakes upon me for the gallows. You're a good man, and true. I never seen a better man, and you'll not forget what I done good. Not any more than you'll forget the bad, I know. And I step aside, see here, and leave you and Jim alone, and you'll put that down for me too, for it's a long stretch, is that. So saying, he stepped back a little way until he was out of earshot, and there sat down upon a tree stump and began to whistle, spinning round and now and again upon his seat, so as to command a sight sometimes of me and the doctor, and sometimes of his unruly ruffians, as they went to and fro in the sand between the fire which they were busy rekindling, and the house from which they brought forth the bread to make the breakfast. So, Jim, said the doctor sadly, here you are. As you have brewed, so shall you drink, my boy. Heaven knows I cannot find it in my heart to blame you, but this much I will say. Be it kind or unkind, when Captain Smollett was, well, you dared not have gone off, and when he was ill and couldn't help it, by George, it was downright cowardly. I will own that I here began to weep. Doctor, I said, you might spare me. I have blamed myself enough. My life's forfeit anyway, and I should have been dead by now if Silver hadn't stood for me. And, doctor, believe this, I can die, and I dare say I deserve it. But what I fear is torture. If they come to torture me... Jim, the doctor interrupted, and his voice was quite changed. Jim, I can't have this. Whip over. We'll run for it. Doctor, said I passed my word. I know, he cried. We can't help that. Jim, now, I'll take it on my shoulders. Holus bolus, blame and shame, my boy, but stay here. I cannot help you. Jump. One jump and you're out, and we'll run for it like antelopes. No, I replied. You know right well you wouldn't do the thing yourself. Neither you, nor squire, nor captain, and no more will I. Silver trusted me. I passed my word, and back I go. But, doctor, you will not let me finish. If they come to torture me, I might let slip a word of where the ship is, for I got the ship, part by luck and part by risking, as she lies in North Inlet, on the southern beach, just below high water. At half tide, she must be high and dry. The ship! Exclaimed the doctor. Rapidly I described to him my adventures, and he heard me out in silence. There is a kind of fate in this, he observed when I had done. Every step, it's you that saves our lives. And do you suppose by any chance that we are going to let you lose yours? That would be a poor return, my boy. You found out the plot. You found Ben Gunn, the best deed that ever you did or will do, though you live to 90. Oh, by Jupiter! And talking of Ben Gunn, why, this is the mischief in person. Silver! He cried, Silver! I'll give you a piece of advice, he continued as the cook drew near again. Don't you be in any great hurry after that treasure. Why, sir, I do my possible, which that ain't, said Silver. I can only, asking your pardon, save my life and the boys by seeking for that treasure, and you may lay to that. Well, Silver, replied the doctor, if that is so, I'll go one step further. Look for squalls when you find it. Sir, said Silver, as between man and man, that's too much and too little. What you're after? Why you left the blockhouse? Why you given me that there chart? I don't know now, do I? And yet, I done your bidding with my eyes shut and never a word of hope. But no, this here's too much. If you won't tell me what you mean plain out, just say so and I'll leave the helm. No, said the doctor musingly. I've no right to say more. It's not my secret, you see, Silver. Or, I give you my word, I'd tell you. But I'll go as far with you as I dare go, and a step beyond, for I'll have my wigs sorted by the captain, or I'm mistaken. And first I'll give you a bit of hope, Silver. If we both get alive out of this wolf trap, I'll do my best to save you, short of perjury. Silver's face was radiant. Oh, you couldn't say more, I'm sure, sir. Not if you was my mother, he cried. Well, that's my first concession, added the doctor. My second is a piece of advice. Keep the boy close beside you, and when you need help, halloo. I'm off to seek it for you, and that itself will show you if I speak at random. Goodbye, Jim. And Dr. Livesey shook hands with me through the stockade, nodded to Silver, and set off at a brisk pace into the wood. Bit of my own grog, the iced tea there. Chapter 31, entitled The Treasure Hunt, Flint's Pointer. Jim, said Silver when we were alone, if I saved your life, you saved mine, and I'll not forget it. I seen the doctor waving you to run for it. With the tail of my eye, I did, and I seen you say no. As plain as hearing, Jim, that's one to you. This is the first glint of hope I had since the attack failed, and I owe it to you. And now, Jim, we're to go in for this here treasure hunting, with sealed orders, too, and I don't like it. You and me must stick close, back to back like, and we'll save our necks in spite of fate and fortune. Just then a man hailed us from the fire that breakfast was ready, and we were soon seated here and there about the sand over biscuit and fried junk. They had lit a fire fit to roast an ox, and it was now grown so hot that they could only approach it from the windward, and even there not without precaution. In the same wasteful spirit, they had cooked, I suppose, 3 times more than we could eat, and one of them, with an empty laugh, threw what was left into the fire, which blazed and roared again over this unusual fuel. I never in my life saw men so careless of the morrow. Hand to mouth is the only word that can describe their way of doing, and what with wasted food and sleeping sentries, though they were bold enough for a brush and be done with it, I could see their entire unfitness for anything like a prolonged campaign. Even Silver, eating away with Captain Flint upon his shoulder, had not a word of blame for their recklessness, and this the more surprised me, for I thought he had never shown himself so cunning as he did then. "Aye, mates," said he, "it's lucky you have barbecue to think for you with this here head. I got what I wanted, I did, sure enough, and they have the ship. Where they have it, I don't know yet, but once we hit the treasure, we'll have to jump about and find out, and then, mates, us that has the boats, I reckon, has the upper hand." Thus he kept running on with his mouth full of hot bacon. Thus he restored their hope and confidence, and I more than suspect repaired his own at the same time. "As for hostage," he continued, "that's his last talk, I guess, with them he loves so dear. I got my piece of news, and thank ye to him for that. But it's over and done. I'll take him in a good line when we go treasure hunting, and we'll keep him like so much gold in case of accidents, you mark. And in the meantime, once we got the ship and treasure both, and off to sea like jolly companions, why, then we'll talk Mr. Hawkins over, we will, and we'll give him his share, to be sure, for all his kindness." It was no wonder the men were in such good humor now. For my part, I was horribly cast down. Should the scheme he now he had now sketched proved feasible, Silver, already doubly a traitor, would not hesitate to adopt it. He had still a foot in either camp, and there was no doubt he would prefer wealth and freedom with the pirates to a bare escape from hanging, which was the best he had to hope on our side. Nay, and even if things so fell out that he was forced to keep his faith with Dr. Livesey, even then what danger lay before us? What a moment what a moment that would be when the suspicions of his followers turned to certainty, and he and I should have to fight for dear life, he a cripple and I a boy, against 5 strong and active seamen. Add to this double apprehension the mystery that still hung over the behavior of my friends, their unexplained desertion of the stockade, their inexplicable cession of the chart, or, harder still to understand, the doctor's last warning to Silver. Look out for squalls when you find it. And you will readily believe how little taste I found in my breakfast, and with how uneasy a heart I set forth behind my captors on their quest for treasure. We made a curious figure, had anyone been there to see us, all in soiled sailor clothes, and all but me armed to the teeth. Silver had 2 guns slung about him, one before and one behind, besides the great cutlass at his waist, and a pistol in each pocket of his square-tailed coat. To complete this strange appearance, Captain Flint sat perched upon his shoulder and gabbling odds and ends of purposeless sea talk. I had a line about my waist and followed obediently after the sea cook, who held the loose end of the rope, now in his free hand, now in between his powerful teeth, and for all the world I was led like a dancing bear. The other men were variously burthened. Some carried picks and shovels, for that had been the very first necessary they brought ashore from the Hispaniola. Others laden with pork, bread, and brandy for the midday meal. All the stores, I observed, came from our stock, and I could see the truth of Silver's words the night before. Had he not struck a bargain with the doctor, he and his mutineers, deserted by the ship, must have been driven to subsist on clear water and the proceeds of their hunting. Water would have been little to their taste. A sailor is not usually a good shot, and besides all that, when they were so short of eatables, it was not likely they would be very flush of powder. Well, thus equipped, we all set out, even the fellow with the broken head, who should certainly have kept in shadow, and straggled, one after another, to the beach, where the 2 gigs awaited us. Even these bore trace of the drunken folly of pirates, one in a broken thwart, and both in their muddy and unbaled condition. Both were to be carried along with us for the sake of safety, and so, with our numbers divided between them, we set forth upon the bosom of the anchorage. As we pulled over, there was some discussion on the chart. The red cross was, of course, far too large to be a guide, and the terms of the note on the back, as you will hear, admitted of some ambiguity. As they ran, the reader may remember, thus: tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to north of north-northeast, Skeleton Island, east-southeast, and by east, 10 feet. A tall tree was thus the principal mark. Now, right before us, the anchorage was bounded by a plateau from 200 to 300 feet high. Adjoining on the north, the sloping southern shoulder of the spyglass, and raising again toward the south into the rough, cliffy eminence called the mizzenmast hill. The top of the plateau was dotted thickly with pine trees of varying height. Every here and there One of the different species rose 40 or 50 feet clear above its neighbors, and which of these was the particular tall tree of Captain Flint could only be decided on the spot and by the readings of the compass. Yet, although that was the case, every man on board the boats had picked a favorite of his own ere we were halfway over, Long John alone shrugging his shoulders and bidding them wait till they were there. We pulled easily, by Silver's directions, not to weary the hands prematurely, and after quite a long passage, landed at the mouth of the second river, that which runs down a woody cleft of the spyglass. Thence, bending to our left, we began to ascend the slope toward the plateau. At the first outset, heavy, miry ground and a matted, marish vegetation greatly delayed our progress, but by little and little the hill began to steepen and become stony underfoot, and the wood to change its character and to grow in a more open order. It was, indeed, a most pleasant portion of the island that we were now approaching. A heavy scented broom and many flowering shrubs had almost taken the place of grass. Thickets of green nutmeg trees were dotted here and there with the red columns and the broad shadow of the pines, and the first mingled their spice with the aroma of the others. The air, besides, was fresh and stirring, and this, under the sheer sunbeams, was a wonderful refreshment to our senses. The party spread itself abroad in a fan shape, shouting and leaping to and fro. About the center and a good way behind the rest, Silver and I followed, I tethered by my rope, he plowing with deep pants among the sliding gravel. From time to time, indeed, I had to lend him a hand, or he must have missed his footing and fallen backward down the hill. We had thus proceeded for about half a mile, and were approaching the brow of the plateau when the man upon the farthest left began to cry aloud, as if in terror. Shout after shout came from him, and the others began to run in his direction. "He can't have found the treasure," said old Morgan, hurrying past us from the right, "for that's clean a top." Indeed, as we found when we also reached the spot, it was something very different. At the foot of a pretty big pine, and involved in a green creeper, which had even partly lifted some of the smaller bones, a human skeleton with a few shreds of clothing, lay a human skeleton with a few shreds of clothing on the ground. I believe a chill struck for a moment to every heart. "He was a seaman," said George Merry, who, bolder than the rest, had gone up close and was examining the rags of clothing. "Leastways, this is good sea cloth." "Aye, aye," said Silver. "Like enough you wouldn't look to find a bishop here, I reckon. But what sort of a way is it for bones to lie? 'Tain't in nature." Indeed, on a second glance, it seemed impossible to fancy that the body was in a natural position, but for some disarray, the work, perhaps, of the birds that had fed upon him, or of the slow-growing creeper that had gradually enveloped his remains. The man lay perfectly straight, his feet pointing in one direction, his hands raised above his head like a diver's, pointing directly in the opposite. "I have taken a notion into my old numbskull," observed Silver. "Here's the compass. Here's the tip-top pint o' skeleton island sticking out like a tooth. Just take a bearing, will you, along the line of them bones." It was done. The body pointed straight in a direction of the island, and the compass read duly east-southeast and by east. "I thought so," cried the cook. "This here's a pointer. Right up there is our line for the Pole Star and the Jolly Dollars. But by thunder, if it don't make me cold inside to think of Flint. This is one of his jokes, and no mistake. Him and these 6 was alone here. He killed 'em, every man, and this one he hauled here and laid down by compass. Shiver me timbers. They're long bones, and the hair's been yellow. Aye, that would be Allardyce. You mind Allardyce, Tom Morgan? Aye, aye, returned Morgan. I mind him. He owed me money, he did, and took my knife ashore with him. Speaking of knives, said another, why don't we find his'n lying round? Flint weren't the man to pick a seaman's pocket, and the birds, I guess, would leave it be. Oh, by the powers, and that's true, cried Silver. There ain't a thing left here, said Mary, still feeling round among the bones. Not a copper dolt for a baccy box. It don't look natural to me. No, by gum, it don't, agreed Silver. Not natural, nor not nice, says you, by great guns. Messmates, but if Flint was living, this would be a hot spot for you and me. 6 they were, and 6 are we, and bones is what they are now. I saw him dead with these here deadlights, said Morgan. Billy took me in. There he laid with penny pieces on his eyes. Dead? Aye, sure enough, he's dead and gone below, said the fellow with the bandage. But if ever spirit walked, it would be Flint's. Dear heart, but he died bad, did Flint. Aye, that he did, observed another. Now he raged, and now he hollered for the rum, and now he sang 15 men were his only song mates, and I tell you true, I never rightly liked to hear it since. It was main hot, and the windy was open, and I hear that old song comin' out as clear, and the death hall on the man already. Come, come, said Silver, stow this talk, he's dead, and he don't walk. That I know, leastways. He won't walk by day, and you may lay to that. Care killed a cat. Fetch ahead for the doubloons. We started, certainly, but in spite of the hot sun and the staring daylight, the pirates no longer ran separate and shouting through the wood, but kept side by side and spoke with bated breath. The terror of the dead buccaneer had fallen on their spirits. Chapter 32 is entitled The Treasure Hunt, A Voice Among the Trees. Partly from damping influence of this alarm, partly to rest Silver and the sick folk, the whole party sat down as soon as they had gained the brow of the ascent. The plateau being somewhat tilted toward the west, this spot on which we had paused commanded a wide prospect on either side. Before us, over the treetops, we beheld the Cape of the Woods, fringed with surf. Behind, we not only looked down upon the anchorage and Skeleton Island, but saw, clear across the spit and the eastern lowlands, a great field of open sea upon the east. Sheer above us rose the spyglass, here dotted with single pines, there black with precipices. There was no sound but that of the distant breakers mounting from all around, and the chirp of countless insects in the brush. Not a man, not a sail upon the sea. The very largeness of the view increased the sense of solitude. Silver, as he sat, took certain bearings with his compass. There are 3 tall trees, said he, about in the right line from Skeleton Island. Spyglass Shoulder, I take it, means that lower point there. It's child's play to find the stuff now, I've half a mind to dine first. I don't feel sharp, growled Morgan. Thinkin' o' Flint. I think it were as done me. Ah, well, my son, you praise your stars he's dead, said Silver. He were an ugly devil, cried the third pirate with a shudder. That blue in the face, too. That was how the rum took him, added Mary. Blue. Well, I reckon he was blue. That's a true word. Ever since they had found the skeleton and got upon this train of thought, they had spoken lower and lower, and they had almost got to whispering by now, so that the sound of their talk hardly interrupted the silence of the wood. All of a sudden, out of the middle of the trees in front of us, a thin, high, trembling voice struck up the well-known air and words. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. I never have seen men more dreadfully affected than the pirates. The color went from their 6 faces like enchantment. Some leapt to their feet, some clawed hold of others. Morgan groveled on the ground. It's Flint! Cried Mary. The song had stopped as suddenly as it began, broken off, you would have said, in the middle of a note, as though someone had laid his hand upon the singer's mouth. Coming through the clear, sunny atmosphere among the giant tree-tops, I thought it sounded airily and sweetly, and the effect on my companions was the stranger. Come, said Silver, struggling with his ashen lips to get the word out. This won't do. Stand by to go about. This is a rum start, and I can't name the voice, but it's someone skylarking, someone that's flesh and blood, you may lay to that. His courage had come back as he spoke, and some of the color to his face along with it. Already the others had begun to lend an ear to this encouragement, and were coming a little to themselves, when the same voice broke out again, not this time singing, but in a faint, distant hail that echoed yet fainter among the clefts of the spyglass. Excuse me. Darby McGraw, it wailed, for that is the word that best described the sound. Darby McGraw, Darby McGraw. Again and again and again, and then rising a little higher, and with an oath that I leave out. Fetch aft the rum, Darby. The buccaneers remained rooted to the ground, their eyes starting from their heads. Long after the voice had died away, they still stared in silence dreadfully before them. That fixes it, gasped one. Let's go. They was his last words, moaned Morgan. His last words above board. Dick had his Bible out and was praying volubly. He had been well brought up, had Dick, before he came to sea and fell among the bad companions. Still, Silver was unconquered. I could hear his teeth rattle in his head, but he had not yet surrendered. Nobody in this here island ever heard of Darby, he muttered. Not one but us that's here. And then, making a great effort, shipmates, he cried, I'm here to get that stuff, and I'll not be beat by man or devil. I never was feared of Flint in his life, and by the powers, I'll face him dead. There's 700,000 pound, not a quarter of a mile from here. When did ever a gentleman of fortune show his stern to that much dollars for a boozy old seaman when his blue mug and him dead too? But there was no sign of reawakening courage in his followers, rather, indeed, of growing terror at the irreverence of his words. Belay there, John, said Mary. Don't you cross a spirit? And the rest were all too terrified to reply. They would have run away, severally, had they dared, but fear kept them together and kept them close by John, as if his daring helped them. He, on his part, had pretty well fought his weakness down. Spirit? Well, maybe, he said. But there's one thing not clear to me. There was an echo. Now, no man ever seen a spirit with a shadow. Well then, what's he doing with an echo to him? I should like to know. That ain't in nature, surely. This argument seemed weak enough to me, but you can never tell what will affect the superstitious, and to my wonder, George Merry was greatly relieved. Well, that's so, he said. You've a head upon your shoulders, John, and no mistake. 'Bout shipmates, this here crew is on a wrong tack, I do believe. And come to think on it, it was like Flint's voice, I grant you, but not just so clear a way like it, after all. It was liker someone else's voice now. It was liker... By the powers, Ben Gunn, roared Silver. Aye, and so it were, cried Morgan, springing to his knees. Ben Gunn it were. It don't make much odds do it now, asked Dick. Ben Gunn's not here in the body any more in Flint. But the older hands greeted this remark with scorn. Why, nobody minds Ben Gunn, cried Mary. Dead or alive, nobody minds him. It was extraordinary to see their spirits had returned and how the natural color had revived in their faces. Soon they were chatting together, with intervals of listening, and not long after, hearing no further sound, they shouldered the tools and set forth again, Mary walking first with Silver's compass to keep them on the right line with Skeleton Island. He had said the truth, dead or alive. Nobody minded Ben Gunn. Dick, alone still, held his Bible and looked around him as he went, with fearful glances, but he found no sympathy, and Silver even joked him on his precautions. I told you, said he, I told you you had spilled your Bible, and if it ain't no good to swear by, what do you suppose a spirit would give for it? Not that. And he snapped his big fingers, halting a moment on his crutch. But Dick was not to be comforted. Indeed, it was soon plain to me that the lad was falling sick, hastened by heat, exhaustion, and the shock of his alarm. The fever predicted by Dr. Livesey was evidently growing swiftly higher. It was fine open walking here upon the summit. Our way lay a little downhill, for, as I have said, the plateau tilted towards the west. The pines, great and small, grew wide apart, and even between the clumps of nutmeg and azalea, wide open spaces baked in the hot sunshine. Striking as we did pretty near northwest across the island, we drew on the one hand ever nearer under the shoulders of the spyglass, and on the other looked ever wider over the western bay, where I had once tossed and trembled in the coracle. The first of the tall trees was reached, and by the bearings proved the wrong one. So with the second. The third rose nearly 200 feet into the air above a clump of underwood. A giant of a vegetable, with a red column as big as a cottage, and a wide shadow around in which a company could have maneuvered. It was conspicuous, far to see both on the east and west, and might have been entered as a sailing mark upon the chart. But it was not its size that now impressed my companions. It was the knowledge that 700,000 pounds in gold lay somewhere buried below its spreading shadow. The thought of the money as they drew nearer swallowed up their previous terrors. Their eyes burned in their heads, their feet grew speedier and lighter. Their whole soul was bound up in that fortune, that whole lifetime of extravagance and pleasure that lay waiting there for each of them. Silver hobbled, grunting on his crutch. His nostrils stood out and quivered. He cursed like a madman when the flies settled in on his hot and shiny countenance. He plucked furiously at the line that held me to him, and from time to time turned his eyes upon me with a deadly look. Certainly, he took no pains to hide his thoughts, and certainly I read them like print. In the immediate nearness of the gold, all else had been forgotten. His promise and the doctor's warning were both things of the past, and I could not doubt that he hoped to seize upon the treasure, find and board the Hispaniola under cover of night, cut every honest throat about that island, and sail away as he had at first intended, laden with crimes and riches. Shaken as I was with these alarms, it was hard for me to keep up with the rapid pace of the treasure hunters. Now and again I stumbled, and it was then that Silver plucked so roughly at the rope and launched at me his murderous glances. Dick, who had dropped behind us and now brought up the rear, was babbling to himself, both prayers and curses, as his fever kept rising. This also added to my wretchedness, and to crown all, I was haunted by the thought of the tragedy that had once been acted on that plateau, when that ungodly buccaneer with the blue face, he who died at Savannah, singing and shouting for drink, had there with his own hand cut down his 6 accomplices. This grove that was now so peaceful must then have rung with cries, I thought, and even with the thought I could believe I heard it ringing still. We were now at the margin of the thicket. "Huzzah, mates, all together!" shouted Mary, and the foremost broke into a run. And suddenly, not 10 yards further, we beheld them stop. A low cry arose. Silver doubled his pace, digging away with the foot of his crutch like one possessed. The next moment he and I had come also to a dead halt. Before us was a great excavation, not very recent, for the sides had fallen in and grass had sprouted on the bottom. In this were the shaft of a pick broken in two, and the boards of several packing cases strewn around. On one of these boards I saw branded with hot iron the name Walrus, the name of Flint's ship. All was clear to probation. The cash had been found and rifled. The 700,000 pounds were gone. And there we go. That concludes chapter 32, and we are getting down towards the end of it. Where has the treasure gone? Who was the mysterious voice? What will happen to Jim Hawkins and the other pirates? And what will happen to Long John Silver now that this has happened? So let me tell you what the future looks like, and that is when we return at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, next Wednesday, we will read the last 2 chapters, and that will be the conclusion of Treasure Island. And because of this little situation here, I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break. We're going to let this heal up, and when we're back in the library again and back ready to keep going, we want to be able to pick out another book. So I'll put a post on the Facebook page along with that list that I put before when we did Treasure Island. We'll put that list up again of all the titles that are available. I mean, obviously, only certain. There are many more titles that are available in public domain. something that we can read together on Project Gutenberg, or is easily found. And and we'll put that list up. And then, like I said, if you have any other great ideas, the people of this group, I think, have some really good thoughts on certain titles to read, and I certainly look forward to seeing what suggestions come up. I will do the post tomorrow for the other titles, and we can kind of decide what we want to do. But we maybe we'll take a little break after we've decided what title we want to. We'll give people about a week or so to kind of decide on what they want, or what kind of title they would vote for. As before, if you would please put your votes into the comments of that post, that will really tell me what stories you are interested in hearing. And hopefully, once we are all back to normal again, we can all start up a new story, and we will begin again on another great adventure or mystery title that picked out by you folks. So thank you for joining me today for these 3 chapters of Treasure Island. I do hope you'll join me on Wednesday as we read our concluding 2 chapters, and keep an eye out for the post for tomorrow as we put in some possible ideas and suggestions for the next book that we will read in a few weeks' time. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll see you again. Bye.